We've seen all the file types that make up the Android project. So the next question is, how do all those file types come together to create our Android application? So as you recall, we have several different pieces to this, right? We've got our Android manifest. We, of course, have our Java source code, which are going to be our executable code. And, of course, we have those resources that all kind of make up our project. Well, it turns out there are a number of steps involved in how these all build to ultimately create what is our application. Because what we need to do ultimately is create what's called an APK file. The APK file is what we actually send to an Android device through, which contains our program. So first thing that has to happen is that there's a tool called the Android Asset Packaging Tool, or AAPT, that takes both in our resources and that Android manifest, and it processes those. And it produces two forms of output. One form of output is actually a Java file. Inside a lot of those resources, there'll be IDs and other things that we need to use inside of our source code. So this tool builds a Java file and inside of a class called the R class that contains all these types of IDs and other values we'll need to access directly from our source code. It also creates compiled versions of the resources. These are things like the layouts pre-processed to be better optimized at runtime and those sort of things. So once that happens, the next step is to move towards a more Java experience, or I should say more traditional Java experience. So what happens is that we actually need to run through the Java compiler. What's going to happen now is that our Java source code is going to run into that Java compiler, but also that generated r.java file, the one containing information about our resources, gets fed into that. And that produces a traditional Java class file. Now as I would say, traditional Java, these class files are what are used in producing our programs. The thing is that Android doesn't use the standard Java runtime, right? It uses a special runtime called the Dalvik runtime that's optimized for use on mobile devices. So the Java class files themselves are not directly usable. So what happens then is that what comes out of the compiler, these Java classes, has to be fed into a tool called Dext, which is the Dalvik executable tool. You feed that in, and that gives you out some .dext files. So these are basically Java class files re-engineered or regenerated to be compatible with the Android runtime. Right, so at this point, we have compiled versions of our Java classes and the resource information in this Dext format, and we also have compiled resources that are all kind of sitting there ready to come together. So what we need to do is combine those to create our Android application. So there's something called the APK builder, and what we do then is we feed those Dext files into that, the compiled resources into that, and that ultimately produces our APK file, the thing that we deploy out to Android. Now you look at all this, you go, wow, that's way more complicated than just building some simple C# or Visual Basic. But the good news is that we don't have to worry about all these details most of the time, because Eclipse wraps all these details up for us in its standard build process. You'll see there are times along the way that we need to understand what steps happened in the middle, but the good news is we don't have to work through them explicitly all the time.